The glow of Pinnacle Restaurant's chandeliers danced off crystal glasses and silver cutlery, the kind of place where every detail whispered of power and wealth. Jason Blackwood sat at the head of the long mahogany table, a man built for command. At 45, he was as precise as the watch on his wrist, each second accounted for, each decision calculated to secure his empire. His tailored suit caught the dim light, his expression fixed in that subtle smile of someone who could crush you without raising his voice. Around him, bankers and investors leaned forward eagerly, their laughter just loud enough, their compliments rehearsed. Jason tapped the rim of his glass absent-mindedly, not because he was nervous, but because he was already 3 moves ahead, analyzing numbers and deals that had nothing to do with the small talk buzzing around him. The waiter moved with practiced silence, collecting the porcelain dish where Jason's appetizer had been arranged like a work of art. It was then so small a detail, so easily missed that Jason saw it. A napkin folded neatly beneath his plate, out of place. He frowned slightly, more curious than concerned, and slid it into his lap without breaking the weight of his smile. For appearance's sake, he nodded along as one of the bankers droned on about projections. But beneath the table, his fingers unfolded the note. The handwriting was clumsy, uneven, the kind that still carried the roundness of childhood. His sharp eyes read quickly, but the words rooted him to the leather chair as if the floor had dropped away. My grandmother Margaret is dying. She says you're my father. Please come before it's too late. Pine Hill Shelter, Jason's hand still, his chest tightening as though someone had driven a fist into his ribs. Margaret. The name carried the weight of years he had spent burying beneath ambition. Margaret was Emily's mother, Emily, the only woman who had ever truly unsettled him, the woman he had loved in the reckless heat of his youth. He had chosen power over her, leaving without looking back, and yet, here it was. Her ghost clawing its way back into his carefully constructed life through the shaky pen strokes of a child. The room seemed to blur around him. The laugh of the banker to his left turned into hollow echoes. Even the gleam of the chandeliers felt too sharp, too bright. He stared at the napkin, the words searing into him, and for the first time in decades, he felt something he did not control: fear. Mr. Blackwood, about the projections for next quarter, one of the men prompted, oblivious to the storm building across from him. Jason blinked, his mask slipping. The words on the napkin thundered louder than any deal, louder than the billion-dollar empire he had built from nothing. His fingers crumpled the linen in his palm as he pushed back from the table. The scrape of his chair against the hardwood floor startled the group into silence. He never excused himself. He never faltered. But tonight, his voice carried a tremor he despised. "I need to leave," he said, each syllable clipped, far and even to his own ears. Family emergency, the phrase hung in the air like a revelation. Jason Blackwood had never once in his life used those words. And yet, as he strode out of the restaurant, his pulse pounding, he knew with chilling clarity that no contract, no boardroom, no empire could compete with the message written in that child's uneven hand. The Bentley's engine purred like a restless animal beneath Jason's steady hands. But for once, he felt no comfort in its precision. The city blurred past the tinted windows, glittering towers, neon signs, the humming nightlife of men and women still chasing power as he once had. Tonight, none of it mattered. He replayed the words scrawled across that napkin, each shaky letter carving deeper into him. My grandmother Margaret is dying. She says you're my father. The words felt like a riddle, a curse, and a confession all at once. Jason gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles widened. Margaret. The name gnawed at him with ruthless persistence. She had been kind, almost motherly toward him back when he was young and reckless, before his empire demanded blood and devotion. And Emily, her daughter, the woman he had abandoned when his ambition swallowed every piece of his heart, her image rose in his mind as vividly as if it had been yesterday. The gentle laughter, the defiance in her eyes, which she'd accused him of loving steel towers more than her touch. He had walked away, convinced he was too important, too destined for greatness to be chained by love. Now a child's plea, scribbled on a napkin, threatened to unravel the empire that billions could not shake. 20 minutes later, the Bentley glided to a stop outside Pine Hill Shelter. The building stood hunched and weary, bricks darkened with age, windows glowing faintly against the night like tired eyes refusing to close. Jason didn't move. His heart pounded with a violence he hadn't felt even in boardrooms, where billions shifted on his decisions. For years, he had walked into hostile takeovers with icy calm, but tonight, Stepping out of his car onto this cracked pavement felt like walking into a battlefield, where he had no weapon. A cold wind whipped through the parking lot, tugging at his tailored suit. He pulled the door open and stepped inside. The air was different, no perfume of wealth, no sterile polish of glass towers. Instead, it was the scent of old wood, laundry detergent, and something faintly metallic, like sorrow lingering in the corners. His polished shoes echoed on the faded linoleum as if mocking his intrusion into this world. At the reception desk, a tired-looking woman in her 50s looked up. Her eyes flicked to his suit, his watch, his presence. She didn't smile. Instead, she studied him with the guarded expression of someone who had seen too many broken promises. Walk through her doors. "You're Mr. Blackwood?" she asked quietly. Jason nodded, though the word felt heavy in his throat. "She's been asking for you," the woman said, her voice softening, though her eyes did not. "Margaret insisted we find you if anything happened. Said there were things you needed to know." Jason swallowed, his composure fracturing. "Where is she?" The woman didn't answer. Instead, she gestured toward a narrow hallway. "Not Margaret. She passed 3 days ago." Her gaze lingered on him, unblinking. "But the girl. She's waiting." Jason's breath caught. "The girl." The woman turned and disappeared down the hall, her shoes silent against the worn floor. Jason followed, each step heavier than the last. He passed doors cracked open, glimpses of cots, faded posters, and the hollow silence of people with nowhere else to go. His empire had never taken him to places like this. Finally, they stopped at a small office. The woman opened the door and stepped aside. Jason walked in, and then he froze. Standing in the doorway opposite him was a little girl, no more than 8. Her hair was blonde, falling in soft strands around a pale face. But it was her eyes startlingly blue, unflinching, piercing that knocked the air from his lungs. His own eyes, staring back at him from a face half his size. She stepped forward shyly, her small hands clutching the hem of her faded blue sweater. Then she lifted one wrist, delicate as porcelain, and revealed a crescent-shaped birthmark etched into her skin. Jason's gaze dropped to his own wrist, hidden beneath his cuff, where the same crescent had marked him since birth. "Hello," the girl said softly. Her voice trembled, but her eyes did not. "I'm Sophia, the empire builder, the man who never bent." Felt his knees weaken. He had conquered markets, tamed investors, silenced rivals. But this child, with her quiet introduction, stripped him bare. His billions, his towers of glass and steel, meant nothing in this moment. The air thickened until he could barely draw breath, and as Sophia's small eyes searched his face, Jason Blackwood realized the one truth he had never calculated, never accounted for, never prepared to face. He was someone's father. Jason's heart hammered in his chest, each beat echoing like a gavel against the silence of the small office. The door closed softly behind them, leaving only the faint hum of the shelter's heater. Sophia's presence filled the room in a way that disarmed him more than any rival across a boardroom table ever had. Her small hands twisted the hem of her sweater, and for a fleeting moment, Jason wondered if she was just as nervous as he was. But then she looked up direct, unflinching, and he knew the balance of power had shifted. He lowered himself into a chair, knees stiff, his frame awkwardly folding into the worn seat. He was used to boardrooms lined with leather and glass, not this cramped space with peeling paint and a single desk stacked with overfilled folders. Yet, he needed to be at her eye level. Needed her to see something human in the man she had been told was her father. "How did you find me?" he asked, his voice low, hesitant. The words tasted foreign. Sophia bit her lip, her gaze flicking toward the floor before returning to him with an intensity that startled him. "Grandma kept a box," she said. "It had your business cards, newspaper clippings, even a photo. She showed me when I was little. She said you were important, that you were building big things." Her voice faltered. "She told me not to bother you until I was ready, until I was old enough to decide." Jason felt the words land like stones in his chest. Emily, always shielding him, even in her absence. She hadn't sought money, hadn't dragged him into scandal. She had carried the burden alone, choosing silence so he could chase his empire unbroken. The thought tore through him her generosity had protected him, while costing her everything. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, the sharp edge of his cufflinks pressing into his skin. "Emily never told me," he whispered, half to himself, half to her. She never said anything about you. Sophia's small shoulders lifted in a shrug far too mature for her age. She said you had your own life, that you wouldn't have time for us. The words came without accusation, but each one cut deeper than the last. For a moment, Jason's composure cracked. He closed his eyes, and in the darkness, he saw Emily, her smile, her fire, the way she once whispered dreams into his ear before ambition drowned them out. He saw himself, younger, colder, turning away from the only woman who ever held him without expectation. Now the choice stood before him in flesh and blood, staring with eyes that mirrored his own. Sophia's voice pulled him back. Grandma said, when she got sick, that I had to be brave. She said you deserved the chance to know me, even if you didn't want to. Her chin trembled slightly, but she held her ground. So I wrote the note. I thought maybe you'd come. The admission pierced Jason in a way no loss on the stock market ever had. He had spent decades chasing power, worshipping control. Yet here, in the trembling courage of a child, was something far greater than power, a plea for connection, silence stretched. Jason wanted to speak, but the words tangled in his throat. He felt unworthy, as though stepping into her life would only shatter it further. And yet, he couldn't bear the thought of leaving. The office door creaked open, and the shelter director stepped in holding a folder thick with papers. Her expression was grave, as though she held truths too heavy for the room. She placed the folder on the desk between them. Mr. Blackwood, she said, her voice steady, but carrying an undercurrent of sympathy. Emily Harrison named you on Sophia's birth certificate. She never asked for support. She never pursued you, but she wanted the record to show the truth. She wanted Sophia to know. Jason's hands trembled as he reached for the file. Inside were documents, certificates, letters, notes written in Emily's delicate handwriting. The side of her script was like being struck. A single envelope slipped free, sealed and marked with his name. His pulse quickened. The director hesitated before adding, Emily wrote this before she passed. She asked me to give it to you only if Sophia found you. Jason's fingers tightened around the envelope, fear and longing colliding in his chest. His empire had always been predictable, numbers obedient to his will. But this letter, this girl, this life he had ignored was chaos he could neither control nor escape. As Sophia watched him, her small face etched with a mixture of hope and doubt, Jason realized he stood at the edge of a precipice. He could open the letter and face the truth Emily had hidden, or he could walk away as he once had. The weight of the choice pressed down, heavier than any decision he had ever made for his company. For the first time in years, Jason Blackwood was not thinking 3 moves ahead. He was trapped in the moment, and the moment was demanding an answer that could either redeem or damn him forever. Jason held the envelope as if it were a live flame, the edges burning into his palm, though the paper was cold. His breath slowed, chest heavy. And for a man who had once stared down entire boards of hostile investors without flinching, he found himself trembling before a thin sheet of paper bearing Emily's name. Sophia sat across from him, her small legs swinging nervously off the chair, her eyes fixed on him with the quiet patience of someone who had already lived through too much loss. His thumb brushed against the wax seal, hesitant. Every instinct told him to prepare, to calculate, to control. But there was no control here, only the truth waiting to collapse the fortress of silence he had built around his past. Slowly, carefully, he broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of folded stationery, worn soft from being handled. The handwriting leapt at him immediately, her handwriting smooth, graceful, like the sound of her laugh on nights they once dreamed together. His throat constricted as he read, Jason, if you are holding this, it means you know about Sophia. I want you to understand one thing before the weight of everything else. I never told you. Because I love you. I loved you enough not to chain you. You had a destiny bigger than the world I could offer, and I refused to be the reason you faltered. I thought maybe someday, when she was old enough, when you were ready, fate would find its way. And if it never did, I wanted Sophia to know she was born out of love, not regret. Jason's vision blurred, his hand clutching the page until the edges crumpled. He forced himself to keep reading. You don't owe us anything, Jason, not money, not your empire. But if Sophia finds you, if she reaches out, please, I beg you don't walk away again. She is strong, but she deserves to know that she is not alone in this world, that you are her father. Don't let your empire be the only thing that bears your name. The words broke him. Tears slid down his face, silent and hot. carving rivers down the features of a man who hadn't wept since his youth. For decades, he had built walls higher than his towers of steel. But Emily's words slipped through every crack, dismantling him brick by brick. Sophia shifted, her small hand creeping across the desk toward him. He stared at it, delicate, trembling, impossibly brave. Then her fingers brushed his, and he felt something stir inside him that no victory, no empire, had ever given him. Belonging. His phone buzzed violently in his pocket, dragging him back into the present. He pulled it out, his assistant's name flashing on the screen. Reluctantly, he answered, "Jason, where are you?" The voice snapped. "The board is in chaos. Investors are furious. Walking out on that dinner could cost you everything. You need to fix this now." Jason glanced at Sophia, her wide eyes watching him like a test he wasn't sure he could pass. For the first time in his life, he hesitated on a call. His empire or his daughter? "I'll call you back," he said coldly, hanging up without explanation. The silence that followed was staggering. He had never chosen anyone over his company. Not once, until now. Sophia's brow furrowed. "Did you get in trouble?" she asked softly. Jason exhaled a laugh, sharp and humorless. "More than you know." His gaze met hers, and he softened. "But some things are worth it." The shelter director cleared her throat from the doorway, holding another file. "There's more," she said carefully. "Emily set up documents before she died. Custody papers. She left Sophia in your name. Legally, she belongs with you now if you accept." Jason's breath hitched. The word belong struck him differently than it ever had in contracts or business deals. Belong. Family. The one thing he had spent his life running from, now placed at his feet like a final, irreversible choice. His world tilted. He had always been the man with a plan, the man who dictated futures. But in this room, in this moment, his future was being dictated to him not by markets or mergers, but by the ghost of Emily and the blue-eyed child staring at him with fragile hope. And as Jason stared at the custody papers, the suspense twisted tight around his chest. Could the man who built an empire from nothing learn to be a father? Or would fear drive him to abandon her as he once abandoned her mother? The folder sat heavy on the desk, its edges frayed from being handled too many times. Jason stared at it, his pulse drumming in his ears. Custody papers. A word that felt clinical, cold, legal, but underneath it was a truth that shook him. Emily had placed Sophia's future in his hands. Him, a man who had once chosen steel towers over human hearts. His fingers hovered over the papers, but he didn't pick them up. He was afraid that by touching them, he would be accepting a role he didn't know how to play. Father, protector. The titles meant more than CEO, more than billionaire, more than empire builder, and that terrified him. The silence broke with a sudden buzz against the desk. His phone vibrated violently, flashing his assistant's name again. Jason's jaw tightened, and after a long pause, he answered, "Mr. Blackwood." His assistant's voice was strained, urgent. "The board is furious. Walking out mid-dinner. Investors are threatening to pull. They've scheduled an emergency conference call in 30 minutes. They expect you there. If you don't show, you could lose control of Blackwood Enterprises." Jason closed his eyes, the weight of two worlds pressing on him at once. On one side, the empire he had built from dust, his name carved into skyscrapers, the loyalty of thousands of employees, the fortune that made him untouchable. On the other side, a girl with his eyes and his birthmark, a girl who had grown up believing she was unworthy of his presence. He opened his eyes and looked at Sophia. She was watching him, her small face etched with something wise for her age. She didn't speak, but her expression said everything. "Will you leave me too?" The thought hit him harder than any boardroom betrayal ever had. He had abandoned Emily once. If he walked away from Sophia now, the wound would never heal for her or for him. Jason lifted the phone back to his ear. His assistant continued, panic rising. "Jason, if you skip this call, you could lose everything you've worked for." He inhaled slowly, the decision settling like a stone in his chest. "Then let it go," he said. His voice was steady, cold, but underneath was something new, conviction. He ended the call without waiting for a reply. The room seemed to tilt. For the first time in his life, Jason Blackwood had chosen something other than power. But the consequences would come fast. He knew the board would not forgive this. His enemies had been waiting for years, sharpening their knives, waiting for a crack in his armor. Tonight, he had given them one. They would move quickly, circling, ready to devour the empire he had built. Sophia's small voice pulled him back. "Do you love money more than people?" she asked. The question was simple, but it cut through him like a blade. Jason's throat tightened. He wanted to answer no, but the truth was that for most of his life, the answer had been yes. He had sacrificed people, love, family, for the altar of ambition. But now, looking at her, he realized something he had never admitted. All his billions couldn't buy the look in her eyes, the fragile trust that was beginning to form. "No," he whispered finally. "Not anymore." Sophia studied him carefully, as though testing his sincerity. Then, slowly, she nodded, as if granting him a chance he didn't deserve but desperately needed. The shelter director cleared her throat again, her voice firm. "Mr. Blackwood, there's no middle ground here. You can't keep one foot in the empire and one here. Sophia needs stability. If you accept, you have to commit." Jason's chest tightened. He felt as though he stood on the edge of a cliff, the world below waiting to see if he would fall or fly. The choice was brutal in its simplicity. Hold on to his empire, or hold on to his daughter. Before he could speak, the shelter's phone rang sharply in the corner. The director excused herself to answer it. Jason remained still, his gaze locked on Sophia. She didn't look away. Then the director returned, her face pale. "That was the hospital," she said quietly. "Margaret left a message for you before she passed. They found it in her belongings." She handed him a slip of paper with an address. "She wanted you to see it yourself." Jason's stomach dropped. Another message from the past. Another truth waiting to shatter him. He looked at Sophia, at the way her small hands clutched her sweater, her eyes brimming with fragile hope. He realized then that Margaret, Emily, even fate itself, had conspired to corner him. There would be no escaping this moment. Jason stood, his decision unspoken but undeniable. He would face Margaret's last words. He would face whatever truth she had left for him. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't walking into a battle for power. He was walking into a battle for his soul. The night air was sharp against Jason's face as he stepped out of the shelter, with Sophia's small hand in his. For a moment, he simply stood there, the silence between them charged with questions neither dared to ask. The Bentley's polished chrome gleamed under the streetlights, a stark reminder of the life he came from, a world of power and untouchable wealth. But now, with Sophia at his side, the car felt like a cage rather than freedom. The hospital was 20 minutes away, yet the drive stretched on like an eternity. Jason's mind raced with fragments of Emily's letter, the haunting weight of her final words. And now Margaret's cryptic message waiting at the end of this road. His grip tightened on the wheel. He was a man accustomed to knowing outcomes before he even made a move. But tonight every turn of the tires felt like a gamble with fate. Sophia sat quietly in the back seat, her reflection flickering in the tinted glass as the city lights sped past. She did not fidget, did not whine. She simply watched him, her silence heavier than any accusation. Jason glanced at her through the rearview mirror, catching those blue eyes again, his eyes. It unnerved him every time, as though she could see deeper than he wanted her to. When they arrived at the hospital, the nurse behind the desk recognized his name instantly, her eyes widening slightly before she masked it with professionalism. She handed him a sealed envelope. "It was found among Margaret Harrison's belongings," she explained. "She made us promise you'd receive it if you ever came." Jason accepted it, the weight of paper somehow heavier than steel. He thanked her with a curt nod and guided Sophia to a quiet corner of the waiting area. He could feel the tension in his bones, a creeping dread that whatever lay inside would not only alter his life, but strip away what little stability Sophia had left. He broke the seal. Margaret's handwriting, shakier than Emily's, sprawled across the page. His eyes scanned quickly, but every line seemed to stop his breath. "Jason, I begged Emily to tell you." She refused, always protecting your name, your future. She believed she was sparing you, but in truth she was sparing herself from disappointment. "I cannot leave this world without telling you what Emily never would. Sophia was the best thing she ever gave this world, but she is not just your daughter. She is your legacy. Emily built her life around protecting her. If you abandon her now, you will destroy not only Emily's memory, but the child herself." Jason's hand shook, but he forced himself to read further. "There is more. The truth Emily carried alone will shake you, but you must know. Your empire, your company was not only yours. Emily quietly invested what little she had in your earliest days. She never told you, but she helped you start. Blackwood Enterprises rose on both your ambition and her sacrifice. This company is as much hers as it is yours. And now it belongs to Sophia as much as it belongs to you. Jason's vision blurred, his throat tightening. He had spent years telling himself he built his empire alone, that his success was pure grit and brilliance. But the foundation of his empire had Emily's fingerprints pressed into its stones. He had not only abandoned her, he had been blind to how much he owed her. Sophia's voice broke the silence. What does it say? She asked, her tone hesitant. Jason folded the letter carefully, his hands trembling. He wanted to protect her from the weight of it, but the truth pressed against his chest, demanding to be spoken. He knelt in front of her, meeting her eyes directly. It says, he began, voice unsteady, that your mother believed in me even when I didn't deserve it, and that this company I built, it was never mine alone. It was hers, too. Which means, he paused, the realization breaking over him like a tidal wave. Which means it's yours. Sophia blinked, confused. Mine. Jason nodded. Yes, you are my daughter, my heir. Everything I thought I built for myself, it was always meant to be for you, too. The words hung in the air, heavy and electric. For a man who had commanded thousands with a glance, Jason had never felt so exposed, so raw. He had just admitted aloud that the fortress of Blackwood Enterprises did not stand on his name alone, but on the name of the woman he loved and the child he never knew. Before Sophia could reply, Jason's phone vibrated again. This time it wasn't his assistant, it was the chairman of his board. The name alone made his stomach twist. He answered reluctantly. Jason, the man's voice was sharp, furious. We've had enough. Your recklessness tonight has cost us millions in confidence. Tomorrow morning, the board is convening a vote on your removal as CEO. Unless you appear tonight and clean this up, consider yourself finished. Jason froze, the ultimatum crackling in his ear. His empire was crumbling even as the truth of his daughter's existence demanded his attention. Two worlds pulling him apart, both threatening to destroy him. Sophia tugged gently at his sleeve. Her eyes glistened, though her voice was steady. Are you leaving me again? The question cut deeper than the threat of losing his empire. Jason looked at her, this fragile child carrying not only Emily's blood, but also the weight of his future. The choice was here, empire or daughter, steel or flesh. And for the first time, Jason realized that no matter which he chose, the other world would fall into ruin. Jason didn't sleep that night. The hospital's sterile walls closed in on him as he sat awake. Margaret's final letter replaying in his mind like a haunting refrain. His empire had been built on lies he hadn't even known existed, not malicious lies, but truths withheld, sacrifices he had never acknowledged. Emily had been there at the beginning. Her faith, her money, her love had quietly seeded the foundation of Blackwood Enterprises. And now her daughter, their daughter, was looking to him not as a CEO, not as an empire builder, but as a father. When dawn came, Jason's decision crystallized. He could no longer hide behind power, nor could he pretend the empire was enough. The board wanted answers. The investors demanded blood. Fine. He would give them something they never expected. By 9 o'clock, the boardroom of Blackwood Enterprises was packed. The mahogany table gleamed under the cold fluorescent lights, the room buzzing with voices sharp with anger. These men and women had followed Jason for decades, profited off his brilliance. But now their loyalty cracked under the weight of his absence. At the head of the table, the chairman adjusted his cufflinks. His eyes narrowed with predatory satisfaction. The doors opened. Conversation stilled. Jason Blackwood entered, flanked not by lawyers or investors, but by a small girl holding his hand. The sight stunned the room. Whispers erupted, disbelief rippling through men and women who had only ever seen Jason as untouchable, unshakable. But here he was, human, vulnerable, with a child at his side. Jason walked with measured steps, but inside his chest his heart thundered. He pulled out the chair at the head of the table, but instead of sitting alone, he lifted Sophia onto the seat beside him. Gasps spread through the room. The chairman's voice cut the silence. Jason, what is the meaning of this? You abandoned a critical meeting, vanished for hours, and now you bring this child into a board session? Do you have any idea what you've cost us? Jason's gaze was steady, his voice iron. Yes, for the first time, I do. He placed Margaret's letter on the table, sliding it toward the chairman. Blackwood Enterprises was not built by me alone. It began with sacrifice, Emily Harrison's sacrifice. She believed in me when none of you did. She invested what she had, and she carried the cost of my ambition while raising my daughter in silence. That child, he gestured to Sophia, her small hand gripping his sleeve, is not a disruption. She is my legacy. Our legacy. The room buzzed with shock and disbelief. One board member leaned forward, voice dripping with contempt. This is madness. You're tarnishing the company's reputation with personal scandals. Investors will flee. We need a leader, not a father with a sob story. Jason stood, his height casting a long shadow across the polished table. For years, you've mistaken my silence for loyalty. You've mistaken my ambition for greed. But today, I will not choose between the company and my daughter. If protecting her means losing the empire, then so be it. Because an empire built on neglect is nothing but ash. The words landed like thunder. Some board members flinched, others narrowed their eyes, calculating. The chairman smirked. So you admit you're unfit to lead. You've sealed your fate. Jason, the vote will strip you of control. Jason leaned forward, his voice dropping to a deadly calm. You misunderstand. I am not asking for permission. I am telling you what will happen. Emily's early investment gave her equity you never knew existed. That equity was passed to Sophia in her will, which means this company Blackwood Enterprises is not yours to steal. It belongs to me and to her. He reached into his briefcase and produced the documents Margaret had left, signed and notarized. The legal proof. Gasps filled the room as the reality sank in. The chairman's face drained of color. Sophia, silent until now, slipped her hand into Jason's. Her voice was small, but clear. Grandma said you'd protect me, even if everyone else was against us. Jason's chest swelled, tears threatening his composure. He looked at the board one last time, his voice steady, resonant. This is no longer just about numbers. This is about blood, about truth, about legacy. Blackwood Enterprises will not stand as a monument to one man's ambition, but as proof that love, sacrifice, and family endure longer than steel or glass. Silence smothered the room. No one spoke. No one dared. The empire that had once been measured in billions now stood balanced on a father's vow and a child's quiet faith. Jason gathered the papers, lifted Sophia into his arms, and walked out. The board did not stop him. The building itself seemed to bow in silence as he left. Outside, the city roared with its usual chaos, cars honking, people rushing, skyscrapers looming. But for Jason Blackwood, everything had changed. For the first time in his life, he wasn't walking toward power. He was walking toward redemption, toward a future shaped not by ambition, but by the small, fragile hand clutching his dot. And as the doors of Blackwood Enterprises closed behind him, Jason knew he had left an empire behind only to discover something infinitely greater.